What would you do if you came home after 6 years, only to find the door locked, your name erased, and a stranger living in your childhood bedroom? This is my story. When my father died, he left everything to me, but my stepfather had other plans. He forged documents, took my house, and made sure I had nowhere to go. He thought I'd walk away quietly, that I'd let him win. He was wrong. Because I didn't just come back to take my home, I came back to ruin him. My name is Sloane Delacroix, and at 26, I just faced the most calculated betrayal of my life. But while Greg is probably reveling in his stolen luxury, imagining me defeated, lost, powerless, erased, I'm not breaking. He thinks I'll accept this, that I'll walk away like an obedient daughter, like I always have. He believes he's won, that his lies, his forged documents, and his stolen wealth will keep him untouchable. But he's wrong. I am not the naive girl he once dismissed. I am not afraid of him, nor the war that is about to unfold. He took everything from me, my home, my inheritance, my father's legacy. Now, I'm going to take it all back. And I won't just watch Greg fall. I'll make sure he never gets up again. The house was supposed to be mine. I stood in front of it, suitcase in hand, expecting to walk through that familiar door and feel the warmth of home wrap around me like a long-lost embrace. Instead, I was met with a locked door, an unfamiliar voice, and a sickening realization. I was no longer welcome here. A teenage boy, too tall, too cocky, leaned against the doorframe, brows raised. "Who are you?" My stomach turned to stone. Who am I? My name was engraved in the very foundation of this place, yet I was standing on the wrong side of the threshold like a stranger. Josh, my mother's son, Greg's son. The last time I saw him, he was an awkward kid clinging to his father's leg like a shadow. Now he stood before me like he belonged here. I took a step forward, forcing calm into my voice. "Where's my mother?" His smirk deepened, and that was the first crack. The first flicker of something dark curling inside me. "Mum's out, Dad's in the back," he said, shrugging. "You can wait outside." Dad. That word burned. I pushed past him, stepping into the foyer before he could stop me. The air was wrong, sterile, unfamiliar. The warm brown tones my father had once loved were gone, replaced with cold whites and greys. The antique furniture? Replaced. The grand oak table in the dining room? Gone. My father's study? I turned the corner, and my breath caught. My father's study had been stripped. The walls, once lined with bookshelves, now housed Josh's gaming setup. Posters of athletes and neon lights replaced old paintings and leather-bound books. Where my father had once sat, Josh lounged in a gaming chair, sipping soda like a prince in his throne. Something cracked inside me. I stormed down the hallway toward the master bedroom, my mother's room. The door swung open before I could reach it, and there he was, Greg, my stepfather, the man my mother married a year after my father's funeral. He stood there, the embodiment of arrogance, wearing my father's Rolex on his wrist like a trophy. "Well, well," he drawled, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "Look who finally decided to come home, huh?" I wanted to rip that word from his mouth. "This house belongs to me," I said, voice cold. "Where's my mother?" He smirked, a slow, lazy thing, like he had been waiting for this moment. "She's out shopping, but you and I, we need to talk." I could feel the weight of his words, the power play laced within them. I didn't move. Talk about what? Greg stepped forward, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Look, Sloane, I know you think you have some claim here, but things have changed. Your mother and I, we've built a life in this house. We've put in the work, we've paid the bills, and with whose money?" My voice cut through his sentence, sharp and unforgiving. He didn't even flinch. "You laughed, Sloane," he said smoothly, "and we did what was necessary to keep this place running." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just keeping my house, he was erasing me. "I never gave you permission to use my money, Greg." He exhaled like I was exhausting him. "We're family." "Sloane, you really want to nitpick over finances?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to rip this house apart with my bare hands. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down and ice flooded my veins. Bank alert. Withdrawal $10,000. Bank alert. Loan approved $50,000. Bank alert. Second mortgage processed. The words blurred, my stomach twisted. I looked up and Greg was smiling. I took a slow step forward, something simmering beneath my skin. You... relax. Waving a dismissive hand. It's nothing personal, kid. Just business. Business. That was when it hit me. Greg wasn't just keeping the house, he was selling it. And he was doing it in my name. I forced my voice to stay even. You committed fraud, Greg. His smirk didn't waver. It's only fraud if someone presses charges. That was the moment I knew. He didn't think I would fight back. He thought I'd storm out, that I'd yell, cry, curse his name, but that I wouldn't do anything. Greg thought I was still the girl he could manipulate, the girl who walked away after my father died because I didn't have the strength to fight. He was so damn wrong. I took a deep breath, let my shoulders relax. A slow, calm smile curled my lips. You're right, Greg, I murmured. Things have changed. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his gaze, something uncertain. Good, because this wasn't over. This wasn't even the beginning. Greg thought he had won. But I didn't just come back to take my home. I came back to bury him. I walked out of that house without another word, not because I was giving up, not because I was defeated, but because I needed them to think I was. Greg watched me go, arms folded across his chest, smugness dripping from every inch of him. He thought he'd broken me, that I'd walk away and never come back. Josh was practically gloating. His laughter echoing behind me as I stepped off the porch. Let them have their moment, let them feel untouchable. They had no idea what was coming. I slid into my car, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The house loomed behind me, the place where I grew up, the place where my father built his legacy, and they had turned it into their playground. I let myself breathe, just for a second. Then I grabbed my phone and made my first call. I need a favor. The voice on the other end was silent for a beat. Then, Sloan? Nathan Pierce, my father's former attorney. The one man who actually gave a damn about my father's legacy. I need to see you, I said, my voice steady. Now. Nathan's office was exactly how I remembered it. Clean, dark wood, stacks of organized chaos piled on his desk. He looked up when I walked in, eyes scanning me like he was trying to piece together the storm brewing inside me. Tell me everything, he said, setting his pen down. I did, every last detail. Greg's fraud. The loans, the second mortgage, my name plastered all over debts I never took out. When I finished, Nathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I'll be honest with you, Sloan, this is bad, but... He held up a finger when I opened my mouth to argue. It's not unwinnable. I clenched my fists. There's got to be something. My father left everything to me. Greg shouldn't have a legal claim to anything. Nathan's lips pressed together, hesitant, and then he said it. There was a second will. The air in the room shifted. I leaned forward. Excuse me? Nathan opened a drawer, pulling out a file. Your father updated his will a few months before he passed. It was never filed because Greg intercepted it. Rage coiled inside me, hot, sharp, suffocating. Tell me you still have it, I demanded. Nathan nodded, sliding the file across the desk. My fingers trembled as I flipped it open. There, in black ink, legally binding, undeniable. Everything, the house, the investments, the business shares, all mine. Greg knew, Greg always knew. That's why he had to move fast, why he had to bury the truth before I could find it. Nathan watched as realization settled into my bones. Sloan, he said, carefully, we can fight this, but Greg has been in that house for years now. He's planted his name on everything. This isn't just about proving fraud, this is about ripping his entire foundation out from under him. I met his gaze. Then that's exactly what we're going to do. That was step 1. Find the truth, secure it, protect it. Step 2, hit Greg where it hurts. I needed to understand how he operated, how he funded this entire charade. So I called someone who knew, Max Reynolds, an old friend. A private investigator, a man who specialized in unearthing the skeletons people thought they buried deep. You don't call unless it's serious, Max said when I met him later that night in a quiet bar, the kind of place where secrets never made it past the walls. I slid a folder across the table. Greg Carter, my stepfather. Find out everything. His accounts, his business dealings, who he owes, who he's paying off. Max flipped through the documents, then glanced up, curiosity flickering in his sharp, calculating eyes. You looking to ruin him? I took a sip of my drink, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. I'm looking to bury him, Max grinned. Then you came to the right guy. Days passed, I waited, I played my role, the quiet, defeated daughter who had no fight left in her. I needed Greg comfortable. I needed him to believe he had already won. And then Max called. Sloan, you're going to want to sit down for this. I didn't sit. Greg isn't just stealing from you, Max said. He's stealing from people who don't forgive. Silence. How bad is it? I asked. Max let out a low whistle. Let's put it this way. If Greg doesn't sell your house fast, someone's going to break his legs. I exhaled slowly, the pieces clicking together. That's why he was in such a rush to erase me. Greg wasn't just trying to steal my inheritance, he was drowning in debt. And the only way out was selling what wasn't his to sell. He was desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. I smiled. Perfect. The next step was setting the trap. I needed Greg to commit to the sale. I needed proof that he was trying to offload stolen property before he had the legal right to do it. So I called the one person who could help me bait him, Julian Cross, a real estate mogul, a shark in a suit, the kind of man who could make Greg believe he was a legitimate buyer, but who, in reality, was working for me. You sure you want to do this? Julian asked as we sat in his office. I nodded. I need him to think he's about to cash out. That way, when the hammer comes down, it's twice as hard. Julian smirked. You always were ruthless, Delacroix. Not ruthless, I corrected. Precise. The bait was set. Julian reached out, playing the part of a wealthy investor looking for a quick off-market deal. Greg took the meeting immediately. Why wouldn't he? He was bleeding. He needed that money yesterday. But what Greg didn't know? Every word. Every handshake. Every fraudulent agreement he signed, it was all being recorded. I watched from the security feed, heart pounding as Greg leaned in, shaking Julian's hand. Deal, Greg said, sealing his own fate. I smiled. The noose was tightening. He just didn't know it yet. Greg thought he was walking toward freedom. He had no idea he was walking toward the end. The silent preparation was over. The next step, the reckoning. Greg thought he had won. He walked around that house like a king, surveying his kingdom, drunk on stolen power, oblivious to the storm forming right under his nose. I watched him, every move, every smirk, every casual sip of his overpriced whiskey, knowing that soon that glass would slip from his fingers and he wouldn't even see it coming. The deal with Julian was progressing smoothly, or so Greg thought. From the outside, he looked like a man in control, casually negotiating the sale of the house he had no legal right to sell. Julian played his part perfectly, nodding along, feigning interest, making Greg believe he had landed the perfect buyer. Off-market deals move fast, Greg had said confidently over dinner, swirling his drink like some seasoned businessman. You just have to know the right people. The irony nearly made me laugh. Greg had spent years building an empire of lies, believing himself untouchable. His arrogance blinded him to the fact that the walls were already closing in. And he was just sipping whiskey on borrowed time. But the arrogance didn't stop there. One evening, I sat in my car, parked a few houses down, watching as Greg hosted a dinner party, my father's house. My father's dining table. My father's money funding every ounce of his stolen luxury. And there he was, laughing, boasting, raising a glass to his imaginary success. I could only imagine the words coming out of his mouth. Money moves fast in real estate. I always land on my feet. It's all about connections, knowing who to trust. Trust. The very thing Greg had burned to the ground long ago. Josh was just as bad. If Greg was the king, Josh was the spoiled prince. young, reckless, and entitled beyond reason. He walked around in designer shoes, flaunting watches he hadn't earned, throwing parties in a house that did not belong to him. One night I followed him. It wasn't hard. Josh wasn't exactly discreet. He posted everything online, flashing money, drinking at clubs, bragging about his house, his life, his newfound status. I watched from a dark corner as he ran up a tab, buying bottle after bottle for a group of equally vapid trust fund kids. At one point, he leaned back, grinning at some blonde on his arm. Yeah, man, it's crazy. My dad turned a rundown house into a gold mine. I'm telling you, real estate is the move. A gold mine! He was talking about my home. I clenched my fist so tightly my nails nearly pierced my skin. They were so comfortable, so secure, so certain that this was their new reality. And that was exactly why this was going to be so satisfying. Greg's arrogance hit a new peak the next morning. I had barely stepped out of my car when I heard his voice. "Morning, Sloan." I turned. There he was, standing at the end of the driveway, coffee cup in hand, looking like he owned the world. A slow smirk crept onto his face. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" I kept my expression blank. "Just visiting a friend in the neighborhood," Greg chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't have to pretend, kid. I get it. You miss this place." He gestured at my house, as if he had built it from scratch with his own two hands. "You should let it go," he continued, voice dripping with condescension. "Move on, we've made a home here. It's not yours anymore." Not mine. It took every ounce of restraint not to react. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Must be nice, living somewhere rent-free." His smirk twitched, not a flinch. Not obvious. "But I saw it." "Oh, I wouldn't say rent-free," he said smoothly. "We've put a lot into this place." I let silence stretch between us, let him marinate in his own lies. Then I shrugged. "Well, enjoy it while you can." And I walked away. Because that's what he expected me to do. That was his mistake. Greg saw me as an inconvenience, a brat throwing a tantrum. He didn't see me as a threat, not yet. But the beauty of arrogance, it blinds you, it makes you sloppy. And Greg Carter was about to learn a very painful lesson. He thought he was playing chess. But the truth? I had already checkmated him. He just didn't know it yet. Greg thought he was untouchable. He paraded around my father's house, acting like he belonged there, like he had built it with his own hands. He sat in my father's chair, poured himself drinks from my father's liquor cabinet, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had won. And Josh, that entitled little parasite, he was just as bad. He flaunted stolen wealth, burned through money that wasn't his, and strutted through town like royalty. They both thought they were secure, untouchable, unstoppable. They were about to learn the hard way. Arrogance is the greatest weakness of all, because their comfort made them sloppy, and I was about to rip it all away. Greg wanted to sell my house fast, he needed liquid cash, and he thought he'd found the perfect buyer. Julian Cross. What Greg didn't know? Julian wasn't just an interested investor, he was working for me. I watched from across the street as Greg met Julian in a high-end cafe. The security cameras I had planted were recording everything, the handshake, the fraudulent agreements, the gleam of greed in Greg's eyes, and just like that, he committed to selling a house he didn't legally own. The footage was all I needed, but I wasn't done. Julian pushed Greg harder, pretending to be desperate to close the deal fast. He wanted to move funds immediately, wanted Greg's signature on even more fraudulent paperwork. And Greg, he signed, with his name, on my house. The ink hadn't even dried before I sent everything, every illegal contract, every forged document, every falsified record, straight to Nathan. His response? "We've got him." But I wasn't stopping there. Greg thought he had money, but what he really had was debt. I had Max dig deeper, and what he found, Greg wasn't just behind on payments, he was in financial quicksand. Gambling debts. High-interest loans. A trail of financial mismanagement so bad that he was one mistake away from total ruin, and that mistake was me. I leaked everything. Anonymous tips to debt collectors, a carefully placed call to the bank about suspicious activity regarding Greg's fraudulent mortgage. I made sure that every person Greg owed knew exactly where to find him. And then I waited. It didn't take long. 3 days later, I watched from my car as 2 men in dark suits walked up to my front door. Debt collectors. Greg opened it with a fake smile, but that smile died fast. Because these weren't the kind of people who sent polite reminder emails. They were the kind of people who expected payment in full. And Greg didn't have it. The house wasn't just where Greg lived, it was his status symbol. His proof of success. So what happens when the world finds out it was never his to begin with? I made sure everyone knew. Anonymous emails to local journalists, a leak to the real estate community, a sudden wave of interest in Greg Carter, the man selling stolen property. And then came the press. The first article hit the morning of what was supposed to be Greg's closing deal with Julian. Fraudulent home sale? Sources say Greg Carter illegally acquired Delacroix Estate. His name was everywhere. Josh was the first to react. His entire online presence was about status, about showing off the house, the wealth, the privilege. So when the comments started rolling in asking if his family had scammed their way into that lifestyle, he panicked. He tried to defend himself, tried to delete posts, tried to silence the damage. But the internet never forgets. And Greg, he was drowning. Greg had one last hope, that he could sell the house before everything collapsed. But what happens when the buyer he trusted vanishes? Julian withdrew the offer the same day the article dropped. Greg was left with nothing, no sale, no money, no way out. And then Nathan struck. The legal papers hit Greg's desk like a death sentence. Cease and desist, fraud charges, property seizure notices, everything. And just when I thought it couldn't get better, the bank got involved. Remember those fraudulent loans Greg took out in my name? Yeah, they wanted their money back, and guess what? They weren't asking. Greg was spiraling. I watched from a distance as he tried desperately to hold it all together. But Josh, he cracked first. I knew he would. One night I saw it. The moment he snapped. Josh stormed out of the house, screaming at Greg in the driveway. "You ruined everything!" Greg tried to calm him down, but Josh wasn't listening. "The house is gone. The money is gone. You said we were set." And then he got into his car and sped off, leaving Greg alone in the wreckage. I stepped out of my own car, walking toward him slowly. Greg turned, face pale, eyes desperate. "Sloan," he started. "Listen, we can..." I held up my phone and pressed play. Greg's own voice filled the air, his recorded confession detailing every fraudulent step he had taken, every crime he had committed. He listened in horrified silence. And then the front door slammed open. Josh had come back, and he heard everything. "You lied to me," he whispered, shaking his head. "You said it was legal. You said..." Josh turned on Greg. Not to protect me, not to fix things, but because he finally understood. Greg had destroyed them both. And me, I just watched. Because the best revenge isn't just taking them down, it's making them destroy each other. And Greg Carter had just lost everything. But I wasn't done yet. Because what happens when a man has nothing left to lose? He starts desperately searching for a way out. And I was going to make sure every exit was sealed. Greg stood there, frozen in place, his face a mask of sheer disbelief, the weight of everything crashing down on him all at once. The fraudulent sale, the money he'd never received, the debts he couldn't outrun, and now his own son turning against him. His hands trembled as if trying to grasp onto something, anything that could keep him from drowning, but there was nothing left to hold on to. I had made sure of that. Josh backed away from his father, the betrayal clear in his eyes. He wasn't angry on my behalf. No, that wasn't in his nature. He was furious because he had lost too. The lavish lifestyle, the house, the privilege. Everything he flaunted was slipping through his fingers. He had trusted Greg, believed every lie, and now, he realized he had been just another pawn. "You lied to me," Josh said again, voice shaking. "You said it was ours." Greg swallowed hard, desperate now. Josh, listen, I did this for us. I had to make moves, take risks. Josh let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. Take risks? You stole everything. You told me we'd be set, and now we have nothing. His voice rose with every word, and I could see it. The unraveling, the cracks deepening. Greg turned to me, and for the first time in years, I saw something I had never seen on his face before. Not arrogance, not condescension, not the smug certainty that he could talk his way out of this. I saw fear. He knew it was over. I tilted my head, watching him like he was a dying animal. You should have walked away when you had the chance, Greg. My voice was quiet, calm, but every syllable dripped with finality. Greg opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but before he could say a word, the sound of tires crunching against pavement made him freeze. He turned just in time to see 2 black SUVs pulling up in front of my house. Vehicles that didn't belong in this neighborhood. And Greg Carter was no fool. He knew exactly what was coming. 2 suited men stepped out of the first SUV, their movements measured, professional. The kind of men who weren't here for small talk. One of them glanced down at a file in his hands before locking eyes with Greg. Gregory Carter? Greg didn't answer. The man continued, You are under investigation for mortgage fraud, identity theft, and falsifying legal documents. We strongly advise you cooperate. Greg's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The reality of his situation finally hit. He had spent his life maneuvering through loopholes, manipulating, deceiving, always one step ahead. He had convinced himself he was untouchable, but he wasn't. Not anymore. Josh took a step back, distancing himself from the mess, already trying to disassociate. I didn't know, he stammered, shaking his head. I had nothing to do with this. I watched him squirm, trying to separate himself from the wreckage. Pathetic. I turned back to Greg, my eyes locking onto his. You stole my father's legacy, my home, my name, and now? Now you're just another man who played a game he wasn't smart enough to win. Greg's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists. You! But he never got to finish. One of the agents stepped forward. Mr. Carter, you need to come with us. Greg's face contorted with rage, humiliation, defeat. But there was nowhere to run. He was done, and just like that, they led him away. I stood there, watching as he was shoved into the backseat of the SUV, his entire world collapsing around him. The man who stole everything from me now had nothing. I let the moment sink in, and then I smiled. Greg Carter was finished, but my work wasn't over. Josh wasn't getting off easy either. With Greg out of the picture, the house was still legally mine, but Josh, he was still living there, not for long. I gave him 3 days to get out, pack whatever was actually his, and leave before I had the locks changed and his things thrown onto the street. At first, he resisted, swearing he had rights, that he'd fight it. I simply handed him a folder, the legal documents proving he was nothing more than a squatter in my home, and then I hit him with the final blow. The bank had already moved forward with repossessing every luxury item tied to Greg's fraudulent accounts. The cars? Gone. The credit cards? Frozen. The money Greg stole? Being reclaimed. Josh was about to experience something he never had before in his life. Consequences. The day I returned to my home, I found him sitting on the front steps, staring at the place like he was trying to memorize it. I stopped at the base of the stairs, waiting. He looked up at me, something unfamiliar in his expression. Regret? No. Josh didn't do regret, but he did understand loss now. He licked his lips, exhaling sharply. You really did it, huh? I tilted my head. Did what? Destroyed everything. I gave him a slow smile. No, Josh. I took back what was mine. The destruction. You did that to yourselves. He swallowed hard. And my mom? Yes. The woman who sat by and watched as her husband and son stole from me, who knew what was happening and did nothing to stop it. I shrugged. She made her choices. Josh nodded, exhaling shakily before standing up. Then he did something I didn't expect. He held out his hand. Not as a threat, not as a trick, just an acknowledgement. I stared at it for a moment, then, slowly, I turned and walked past him without shaking it. Josh wasn't my problem anymore. I had won. 1 month later, I sat in my father's chair, sipping whiskey from his glass, looking out at our home. Not stolen, not borrowed, mine. Every room, every memory, every inch of this place belonged to me again. Greg, bankrupt, awaiting trial, facing years in prison. Josh, gone. I had no idea where, and I didn't care. My father's name, restored. I had spent years thinking justice was about fairness, about righting wrongs through logic and reason, but some people only understand destruction, and so I gave them exactly that. I took back my home, I took back my life, and in the end, I didn't just win, I erased them. For good.